It is the duty of the conscious ones to free the minds of the mentally enslaved ones. However, the problem is that the mentally enslaved ones don't know that they're mentally enslaved. They therefore stubbornly fight against the conscious ones that tries to free their minds. Here are the 3 beliefs held by the mentally enslaved ones. Number 1, if you now self-identify by the N-word. Number 2, if you're worshiping the God of the ungodly enslavers. And number 3, if you're insisting that it's ourselves that are now our own worst enemies, you are in fact amongst the mentally enslaved ones. If these are your held beliefs, you are in fact mentally enslaved. Not because many people believe these same things to be true doesn't make them true. It most often means that these people have all received the same false information that have been fed into their minds by their oppressors to mentally enslave them. This is the case in regard to now self-identifying ourselves by the N-word, praying to the God of our ungodly enslavers, and insisting that we're now our own worst enemies. I will prove within this video that these are the noted beliefs held by the mentally enslaved ones. First, let's begin with the N-word. We did not make the N-word ours, and using it does not empower us. The truths are, in fact, the opposite on both accounts. It was actually white oppressive forces that socially engineered millions of us to self-identify ourselves by the N-word through a process known as negative media social engineering. Most people naively believe that the media reflects our reality, but the truth is that it most often shapes our reality. A group's identity is shaped by how they see themselves repeatedly depicted within the media. Because people often imitate those media depictions of their group that they've accepted as being their true reality. This even includes derogatory media depictions of their group. Therefore, those who control the people's media images are able to literally negatively steer their culture through their media images. This is what's known as negative media social engineering. It was actually through negative media social engineering that white oppressive forces conditioned millions of African Americans to self-identify ourselves by the N-word. Because white oppressive forces control the media images of African Americans, this allows them to easily negatively steer our culture while misleading us to believe that we're steering ourselves. The way they've gotten millions of us to start calling ourselves by the N-word was by hiring Black actors to do so, beginning within those Black exploitation films during the 1960s. Millions of African American audiences began imitating the behavior they saw in the film, while insisting that we made the N-word ours, although we in fact did not. It was white oppressive forces through their control over our movie media images that manipulated us to start using the N-word to identify ourselves. They did this to us because words have power over the subconscious mind. Words, when repeated often enough, shapes our thoughts, and a thought, when held long enough, becomes a belief. A belief then becomes our biology. We psychologically become the words that we repeatedly call ourselves. It's why men that calls themselves thugs are more likely to engage in a fight than to avoid one. It's also why women that proclaim themselves by the B word often become stubbornly unreasonable. We subconsciously become the words that we repeatedly call ourselves. It's a psychological phenomenon that white social scientists have thoroughly researched. When we repeatedly call ourselves by the N-word, this neutralizes our warrior spirits. You see, to subjugate and control a targeted population, the first step is to neutralize their alpha males, aka those possessing warrior spirits. These are the Black males that are psychologically wired to protect our women and defend our communities. White social scientists neutralized our Black alpha male warrior spirits by socially engineering us to self-identify ourselves by the N-word. Because when we repeatedly call ourselves by the N-word, this conditions us to perceive ourselves through a false, inherent, subordinate identity that makes us lesser inclined to stand up against the white oppressive society. This aids the white society in maintaining their social dominance over us. This is what happens when we self-identify by the N-word. Now, here's what happens when we call each other by the N-word. When we call each other by the N-word, we dehumanize each other. This makes it much easier to mistreat each other. It's a fact that the military has known for many centuries. Case, point, and proof. During the Korean and Vietnam War, to ease the American soldiers' anxieties about torturing and killing those Korean and Vietnamese soldiers, they were taught to refer to them by derogatory Asian terms. This dehumanized them and made it easier to torture and kill them. When negative words are assigned upon other groups, it dehumanizes them within our subconscious mind, which makes it easier to mistreat them. This is what happens when we call each other by the N-word. Case, point, and proof. Have you ever closely listened whenever a black man speaks of a previous attack against another black man? As he presents the detail of the fight, he will say, I hit that N, I kicked that N, I shot that N. The N-word is being used to dehumanize the victim. But if you ask the speaker to retell the story, but replacing the N-word with the words of my brother, it will then become more difficult to retell the story. The more brutal his actions were, the more difficult it becomes to retell the story without dehumanizing his victim. People's behaviors align with what they've been made to believe. Therefore, people can be misled to believe false things that are deliberately designed to change their collective behaviors in ways that negatively impacts their culture and their communities. Using the N-word negatively impacts the black community at a psychological level. Then, to keep us under this negative psychological spell cast by the N-word, every couple of decades or so, white propaganda spreads false information into our communities to keep us using the N-word. The word is often repackaged with a different spelling, such as Nigga and Negus. But the different spelling actually doesn't change anything because the subconscious mind doesn't see the different spelling. You know, if you're self-identifying by the N-word, you are amongst the mentally enslaved. I'd rather lose mentally enslaved black friends for telling the black liberating truth than to endorse false beliefs in order to hold on to mentally enslaved black friends. Furthermore, I will not be silent to appease black ignorance, especially when it's black ignorance that gives our oppressors their greatest power over us. A speaker of truth must teach African proverb. Now let's address worshiping the false god of our ungodly oppressors. The early white Christians' conversion of Africans into their religion had absolutely nothing to do whatsoever with saving the souls of Africans so that we may join them in heaven during the afterlife. This is an irrefutable fact because the early white Christians literally believed that Africans had no souls and that heaven was for whites only. In fact, the early white Christians believed that the thought of an African entering the kingdom of heaven was as ridiculous as a dog doing so. This is an absolute fact. When we logically look at facts as they truly were, we can say with great certainty that the early white Christians, the enslavers and colonizers, conversion of Africans into their religion had absolutely nothing to do with saving the souls of Africans. There was another self-serving reason why they put their time and energy into converting Africans into their religion, converting Africans, the people they otherwise treated so brutally, into Christians. The true self-serving reason was to indoctrinate the belief of a white God into their subconscious minds. This creates a profound adoration towards whiteness within their minds that then it subconsciously transfers towards and transposes upon white people. This subconsciously happens without most black people even realizing it. This makes black people more subservient towards whites and more compliant with white dominance over our lives. During slavery, it made black people into more proficient, more loyal slaves to the white society. It also facilitated the white society's colonization of Africa. Logically, the white oppressors did not convert Africans into Christians to empower us. If the Bible truly contained empowering words of God, it would have been kept as far away as possible from our ancestors, instead of having been brutally forced upon them, as in fact was. Christianity is a tool used to mentally enslave us. Many black Christians defend their beliefs in the Bible by insisting that Christianity was originally practiced in Ethiopia. However, again, this is absolutely untrue. The fact is, Christianity did not reach Ethiopia until the reign of King Ezana in the year 341 AD. That's 16 years after the Romans created the false religion, and they imposed it upon Ethiopia. The Bible was actually written and the Christian religion created by Constantine, the Roman emperor, and the Council of Bishops in the year 325 AD. The Romans were an immoral, ungodly society that routinely engaged in massive orgies and death sports. They continued these practices even long after writing the Bible. The Roman Emperor Constantine, who was in charge of writing the Bible, himself refused to convert into a Christian, even while upon his deathbed. You certainly would not accept a meal prepared by a chef who refused to eat his own cooking. So why then accept a religion created by an emperor that refused to be converted into a Christian? Even upon his deathbed in the year 337 AD, Emperor Constantine refused to be converted into a Christian. After he died, Bishop Eusebius of Nicomedia then baptized him and declared him a Christian after death. These are just many facts that disqualifies the Bible of being the true words of God. These are a few of many. Furthermore, the way of how the Bible was introduced to us is not how an infallible God would allow his true holy words to be introduced to a people. The Bible was in fact brutally beaten into the blood-soaked minds of our ancestors by ungodly white Christians that also raped, maimed, tortured, and murdered them. These noted facts, combined with the fact that the Bible strongly condones slavery, totally disqualifies it from containing the true words of God. Many black people also insist that Jesus is real and that he's black. But let's critically think more. If that is true, given our history, it would then make Jesus the worst black traitor in history, given that he didn't protect us from the European brutal invasion and enslavement of Africa, and he still hasn't rescued us more than 400 years later. The absolute truth is that Jesus never existed. The Romans' creating of the Jesus Messiah myth was actually an ingenious scam. Its ideology that to enter the kingdom of heaven, you had to go through Jesus, gave the church immensely greater power, because it meant that anyone who wants to go to heaven had to go through the church, given that the church controls the Jesus image and narrative. It literally means that the church holds the one and only key into heaven. That's ultimate power on earth. The Christian religion is regarded by the ignorant as being true, by the wise as being false, and by rulers as being useful for controlling millions of people. Now, last, but certainly not least, if you believe that we're now our worst enemies, you are in fact mentally enslaved. During the 1960s, white oppressive forces determined that a core aggravating factor for that decade's unprecedented unified black protests was caused by an elevated and unifying Black collective self-esteem brought on by the emergence of that decade's Black Pride movement. So they determined that Black unified protests could be controlled and subdued by deploying propaganda campaigns against the Black population that keeps us demoralized, divided, lowers our collective self-esteem, and that shifts Black collective aggressions away from deservingly against the white oppressive society and redirects it against ourselves. This is how they ended the Black Power movement of the 1960s. It's deployed like a massive media marketing campaign that subjects the Black population to receiving only the fraudulent worst narratives about ourselves. No group can be constantly subjected to receiving only the fraudulent worst narratives about themselves and not suffer some negative effects. When people are constantly bombarded with fraudulent negative narratives about themselves, this demoralizes them, divides them. Moreover, it creates disunity and self-hatred, which attacks the core foundation of what bonds them as a people, and they can then be ruled over forever. This is the psychological warfare tactic that's been presently deployed against us, unrelentingly by white oppressive forces. Through the white society's monopoly over information that we receive, they feed us disinformation that allows them to mentally enslave us. And those Black people who don't critically think never notice their mental chains. It's time to wake up to our reality. One love and peace.